So, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen.
Good afternoon.
Welcome to Pleshey Castle for Heritage Open Days. And I like to do this every year because Heritage Open Days is something about giving access to people either to sites which are not normally open, and that's the case here, or on sites where there is normally a fee and waiving that fee. So one of the things about Pleshey Castle is it's still in private ownership. There's never been an occasion where it's needed to be go into the public realm. So the private owner is always very happy for me to open up every year. And as you can see, he's even come and mown the lawn. So my name is Nick Wickenden. For many years I was curator at Chelmsford Museum, and I retired just before COVID. And I'm now a tour guide at Colchester. So what I'm going to do is give you a little bit of background about Pleshey and the castle, and then we'll go up onto the brick bridge. I'll stop there and talk about one of the excavations, and then we'll go up on top of the mound. It's a little bit of an optical illusion. It doesn't look that tall, but once you're getting onto the concrete steps, you will start to find it in the back of your legs, and we do get some lovely views from on top, and I'll point out one or two things just to orientate yourselves. So a Norman Motte and Bailey castle. You will see in print every now and then that it's Viking, or it's Saxon, or it's Danish, it's Roman, it's Celtic. It's none of those things. It is a Norman Motte and Bailey castle. And the background to Pleshey is really that we're just outside a triangle of Roman roads in this part of the country, which come up from the Roman town of Chelmsford, come up to Little Waltham, where actually excavations have even found an earlier settlement, an Iron Age village of round houses. But in the Roman times, the road forks at Little Waltham. One arm goes up to Dunmow, the other arm goes to Braintree, both of them Roman towns. And both of them lying on Stane Street, which goes westwards to St Albans. And in the Roman times, countryside would have been had a satellite of villas around the towns, and the Latin word villa is simply Latin for farm. So these are farms in the countryside sending their produce into the towns like Chelmsford. And one of those villas we know was here at Pleshey, not here on this particular site of the castle, but just beyond us at Pleshey Bury. And it was due to be excavated by Mortimer Wheeler, who was one of the main middle of the century archaeologists in Britain in the 20th century. And he has in his autobiography, which is called Still Digging, talks about the first job that he came to in Essex in 1914. For the Royal Commission on Historic Monuments. And he was looking for a site to excavate. And he says in his autobiography that he came across this early imported Roman pottery. And then he says, double inverted commas, in what passes for a museum at Chelmsford. So I do hope he would have been a little bit more charitable now. So he was all due to excavate this villa just beyond us, about half a mile away. But World War I broke out. Wheeler went off abroad, and when he came back to other jobs and other quite important excavations. And I think had he dug at Pleshey Bury, I think Pleshey and Pleshey Bury would have been much better known than they actually are now. But in Roman times, we actually get the first the engraving in the 18th century of Roman Pleshey, if you like, but actually not. I'll explain why. There's an antiquarian called William Stukely in the middle of the 18th century who's travelling around Britain drawing and publishing archaeological and antiquarian discoveries. And he's the first person who puts pen to paper and rightly shows the Motte and Bailey Castle here. He even then shows a defence around the Motte and Bailey Castle, either side of the main road. And that's quite important for Pleshey because one of the nice things about it, it's not only photogenic of the Motte and the Bailey, and I'll pass round an image of from the air showing the Motte and Bailey. But Pleshey is also well known because there was a third defensive element, which was the whole village was defended, because the Normans realised that the Lord would be living up on top of the mound, and his retinue would be eating and drinking and sleeping with their horses, with their water supply, within the defended bailey. But the castle needed a lot of services. It needed tanneries, it needed potteries, it needed blacksmiths, and those were all in the village. And so the village was important to the castle, and that needed to be defended as well. And so from the air you see this great semicircular sweep of the village with the agricultural land lying beyond it. And if you want to follow that, you can on a public footpath. If you just go out of the castle, turn left, and then immediately cross the road, turn right, and you can follow part of the village defences around Pleshey. So after the Roman period, the Saxons came, and the Roman bridges at Chelmsford would have eventually collapsed, and that meant that travellers between London and Colchester had to go via Writtle. And so Writtle actually becomes in Saxon times a much more important place than anything else round and about. And then we come to the Norman conquest. And on the Bayeux tapestry, they're good enough to actually show us the construction of a Motte and Bailey castle. They've even done it in different coloured wools, showing the stratigraphy. So in one operation, you're digging your defensive ditch, and you're throwing the earth up into the middle to create the mound. And then the wooden keep, shown here with planks, is built on top of that mound. So it's a very classic Motte and Bailey castle of the Norman period. And so what we get is the invasion by William I in 1066, accompanied by a relatively small retinue of his supporters from Normandy, local aristocrats who supported him in his fight against the Saxons. And so when he won, what he does is he thanks those aristocratic supporters by divvying up the land of England and doling it out to his friends. And the person who receives this part of Essex is a chap called Geoffrey de Mandeville I, and he has land around here at Waltham. His main house appears to be initially at Waltham Bury, where there are vineyards recorded, and he has Pleshey as part of this land. It's not something that appears on the Domesday Book, so I don't think there's a castle yet by 1086. But by the time that Geoffrey de Mandeville dies in 1100, I'm pretty certain that there was a castle here with the motte, with the bailey, and probably also another bailey on the other side of the motte, which was later dismantled, the bank and ditch levelled, and turned into a marketplace for the village. So there would initially, and it's shown on the map on your green leaflet, been two baileys either side of the motte. Geoffrey de Mandeville dies in 1100. His son is William. You're going to hear an awful lot of Geoffreys and Williams. He only survives his father for 5 years and dies. And his son is Geoffrey II. And it's him who gets the first mention of a castle at Pleshey in the literature, because in 1140 he becomes the first Earl of Essex. And this is a time of the civil war between Stephen and Matilda. And Geoffrey II is quite a canny operator, and it appears that he swapped sides several times depending on who appeared to be winning. And in 1143 the civil war ends, and he's on the wrong side. And he was supporting Matilda, and Stephen comes out on top. And so Geoffrey II is imprisoned, and the following year he's actually executed. And his castles are the defences, and the word we use is slighted. And that doesn't mean that everything was completely levelled flat, but it would mean that things like the gatehouse would have been probably dismantled. and timber palisades around the bailey would probably also have been dismantled. And it's possible at that point that the North Bailey is actually levelled and turned into a marketplace. His son Geoffrey III and his brother William II get permission from Henry II to refortify. And it's probably at this point that the Bailey defences that you can see all around us are built, are strengthened as how we see them now. So there have been excavations which have cut a section through them, and you can actually see a smaller Bailey bank, which is probably what there was initially. And it's probably under this refortification that the Bailey bank ends up looking as we can see it now. The next Geoffrey de Mandeville is not actually a de Mandeville by family, but he's obviously a keen supporter of the de Mandeville family and styles himself de Mandeville. And he is one of the barons in 1215 who forces John to sign the Magna Carta. So there's 25 barons, quite a few of them in Essex, and they force John to give them various rights by putting his seal on the Magna Carta at Runnymede. And immediately afterwards, John reneges on his agreement. He's quite a bad loser. And he uses French mercenaries to go around the baron's properties, taking his revenge and torching these properties. The first one, I think, is Mount Fitchett, gets burnt to the ground. And on Christmas Eve, 1215, they're at the doors of Pleshey. And although, it looks quite defensive, most of this is for status, quite honestly. It's not going to survive a military siege. And so they give up, really. Geoffrey de Mandeville gives up, really, without a fight. And the John's troops come in. But both Geoffrey and John die the following year, and effectively there's still a civil war going on because the king is now Henry III, John's son, but the barons want to offer the crown to the Dauphin, the son of the French king, and so there's still a civil war going on until Henry III ends up winning. And effectively things start to settle down. In the Norman period, I mentioned that Writtle is a more important place than anything round about. And King John had a hunting lodge at Writtle, and the moat of it is still there visible in the grounds of Writtle College. In 1227, ownership passes by marriage to one of the most influential families now, the de Bowens, and it remains in their ownership for a couple of centuries. And the de Bowens are really very important aristocratic family. They are the Earls of Essex, they are the Constables of England, and they start to move up into minor royal circles. And eventually, for instance, Mary de Bowen marries Henry Bolingbroke, who ends up as Henry IV, and she's the mother of Henry V. So we're starting to get into royal circles. And as the castle does well, so does the village, as I mentioned earlier. And in 1273, there's a survey done of Pleshey village, and there's no fewer than 46 shops recorded in Pleshey. And I don't think there's a single one anymore. And in 1380, we reached the real peak of Pleshey's wealth, really, because Eleanor de Bowen marries Thomas of Woodstock, and he is the Duke of Gloucester and one of the sons of Edward III. And so it comes to him as an estate, and it's not just one of his extra also runs. This is his main estate. Pleshey is his seat, a royal seat. And so you've got to imagine diplomats and ambassadors coming to meet Thomas of Woodstock here at Pleshey. And he starts to reconstruct and improve his estate so that the keep, the main tower on top of the mound, gets enlarged. We start to have buildings with roof tiles and glazed octagonal chimneys. And we even know that Thomas of Woodstock has some monks living here illuminating manuscripts. And some of those manuscripts, known as the Pleshey Psalters, still survive. Here's a page from one of them. This one's from Oxford, but there is some of the manuscripts in the Fitzwilliam Museum in Cambridge. And we know that they were actually based here, illuminating manuscripts. And in some of the excavations here, we've even found 2 old oyster shells with gold paint in them, so that these were being used as little pallets for the addition of gold to these illuminated manuscripts. So it really is the chief seat, a royal seat, and the richest phase. And there's a reconstruction that we can show you by Peter Frost of how it may have looked. And again, in excavations, they found medieval glazed roof tiles, floor tiles, and individually they don't look very much. But when you put them into shapes of 4, they start to create repeating patterns. And some of those we've reconstructed to show you what those floors here at Pleshey might have looked like. However, all things good come to an end. And the next king, Richard II, who, if you remember your history, is the boy king who defeated the peasants' revolt, in 1397 actually falls out with his uncle, Thomas of Woodstock, here at Pleshey. And he sends his mayor of London of the year 1397 to arrest Woodstock here, the Duke of Gloucester. And in 1397, the mayor of London, I understand, was none other than Dick Whittington. So Dick Whittington, not Wickenden, that's me, with or without his cat, comes here, arrests Woodstock and takes him to Calais, where he's actually assassinated. And it's then that we have his will and his documents about what he had at Pleshey. He had one of the best libraries in Britain. He had gold and silver embroidered tapestries. He had fur gowns and so forth. Very, very rich. And we know from the excavated finds, if you look at things like animal bone, for instance, they again add to the picture, because we have the bones of, they're called gyre or gyr falcons, GYR. And those are known to have been reserved for the use of royalty. We had peregrines, we had swans, herons, bustards, egrets. So all of this adds to this picture of this wealth here. Even the bones of a macaque monkey. And if you've got the Psalter image, on the back of it there are some monkeys shown here, which the monks were clearly illuminating. And monkeys were actually known to be like pets for medieval aristocrats. We get then a period of about 100 years where it's no longer, well, it's still in some royal circles, effectively in the dowries of wives, and particularly Margaret of Anjou. And in 1477 to 80 is when we believe that she had the brick bridge built. That's making it one of the earliest brick structures in Essex, Margaret of Anjou. And then the wife of Edward IV, Elizabeth Woodville, was also here. And if you're a follower of Pointless, these are good royal names to bear in mind. Okay, Margaret of Anjou, Elizabeth Woodville. But again, a century later, it's all really ruinous. And Elizabeth I has commissioners draw a survey of Pleshey, and it reports that wood is rotting, tiles are sliding off the roofs, which are broken. And then the commissioners report, but there is a bridge which connects the two areas, and the commissioners recommend keeping that bridge because it's the only way to get up on top of the keep. So good on you, commissioners, really. There's a mention in Shakespeare, in Richard II, where it says, with all good speed at Pleshey visit me, and what shall good old Duke of York there see, but empty lodgings, unfurnished walls, unpeopled offices, untrodden stones. So clearly by then it's really a ruin. And it's later in Georgian times, I suspect it is beautified, glorified a little bit, probably landscaped. And we have an engraving here of two Georgian gentlemen down in the dry ditch looking up at the bridge. And actually you can see them looking at a triangle of iron, which one of these iron things which hold masonry together. And if you look on this side, it's still there. So that's the Georgian engraving. And the castle itself by then was a commercial rabbit warren. Well, today it's a scheduled ancient monument. The village is mainly a conservation area, and there have been excavations. I mentioned that it's in private ownership, and if I say that the private owner occasionally has wedding parties here and a large marquee, he has to get the permission of the Secretary of State for Environment to put the tent pegs in. So, you know, it is quite an important thing, scheduled monuments. But the excavations, the first one was at the very beginning of the 20th century on top of the mound. And in your green leaflet, there's showing the foundations, the footprint of the masonry foundations that were found on top of the mound. This is what we think it now looks like. Buildings which you'll see on top. You won't see structures when we go up on top, but this is what we know from the excavations. Probably a range of buildings around a little courtyard with some little outside buildings here, which are basically alternate fireplaces and guardrobes, toilets. So they were like a little sort of bedroom en suites for the royal family. So that's what we think the top of the mound looked like, the building. There was then an excavation in the late 50s and early 60s on behalf of the Essex Archaeological Society, which found the chapel here, just beyond me over there. And they excavated the stone walls of the chapel and even medieval floor tiles in situ. So you can pass those around if you'd like to. And the last set of excavations took place by the University of Birmingham with summer students every summer from 1972 to 1981. And that was just to the right of the brick bridge. And I'm now going to take you up there. I'll stop on the brick bridge and explain a little bit about what they actually found. So I mentioned that this bridge was built in about 1477. Some of you looking at the top of the sides will say, well, hang on a minute, there's frogged bricks there. Frogged bricks weren't around in the 15th century. Well, that's the result really of the Ministry of Works doing conservation work probably in the 60s. And they didn't really have the same feeling that we do today, so they used frogged bricks. But the excavation I referred to by Birmingham University took a strip parallel to the brick bridge. So they started on the side of the mound here and went through the silts of the ditch. So you've got to imagine that the ditch, as built originally, was deeper and the mound was a little bit higher, and then it went up the other side. And what they found in the excavation were the remains of at least 3 previous timber bridges. And each of those timber bridges had been repaired several times, as you can imagine. And the last timber bridge, before they built this brick bridge, was parallel to us here, and it was built on top of 3 masonry foundations, square hollow masonry foundations. One right down in the middle, one here, and those no longer survive, but the third one they retained. So when they built this brick bridge, the timber one was dismantled, but they retained that masonry structure there, and they added it into, they built it onto the side of the house just inside the bailey, and they used it as their guardrobe, in other words, their toilet. And it was then that the little arch that you can see was put in, so that all the waste went into the ditch. And it wasn't anything like you could imagine on a sort of chocolate box picture of a castle with blue shining water. There might have been water at times, other times no water, but it would have been a pretty horrible, smelly place. And one of the other things we found inside that guardrobe when excavated was more or less a complete skeleton of another monkey. And this one, a loris monkey. And I understand that a loris monkey is a very friendly little chap when he's juvenile, but when he comes to maturity, he becomes rather aggressive and actually quite smelly. And my feeling is that the owner of this monkey eventually got too fed up with it biting him and everything, and he shoved him down the toilet. So those are the excavations that remain to be published, and Chelmsford Museum is working with archaeologists to write up now and publish them in a future volume of the Essex Archaeology and History for the county. So there's no other excavations have taken place in the bailey, but there are some buildings which have been found by recording parch marks when you get very dry summers and some buildings start to show up. And those have been interpreted as particularly the kitchen and hall where the retinue would have eaten and had their food prepared. But we'll now go up on top, and I'll just point out a few landmarks, but then it's up to you to enjoy Pleshey Castle and ask me any questions if I'll try and answer them, but otherwise it's over to you. So thank you very much. Okay. I'll just point out, if you look at the barn roof, the tiled barn roof, towards the right of it, I don't think you'll be able to see it because of the tree, you'll need to come this way, but you can actually see on the skyline Melbourne Flats, just to the left of the big tree. Follow the eye along to the left and you'll see the Baddow chain home transmitter. Yep. And then further along, over there, you'll see a slight rise, which is Danbury Hill. So you've got Melbourne, Baddow, Danbury. Okay, so feel free to have a look around. As I said, there's no actual masonry sticking out of the ground here, but we do know from the excavation at the beginning of the 20th century, the rough foundations, and that would have been masonry foundations for timber-framed building, probably a couple of stories high, with external staircases, little suites of buildings for royal family and the owners, with a little courtyard in the middle. So the whole of this top would have been, quite a large structure.